Yo, what's up? It's finally here, my final Canon C70 review. In the beginning I only rented this camera for a couple of big jobs as a B-cam and I wasn't really convinced that this would be a tool that is worth adding to my gear collection. But then I discovered the speed booster and totally fell in love with the camera, so I went ahead and purchased it. Ever since I've been using the Canon C70 on all kinds of jobs, on big commercials, as a B-cam, as an A-cam, as a gimbal cam, but also as my main camera for a big rep series that we've just wrapped up. So I did get a lot of experience with this camera, so in this video I will give you my opinion on the Canon C70. My name is Damien Cooper and welcome to Monkey Pixels. Before we start the video, let's give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Epidemic Sound, a music site that I've been basically using from day one, and I don't need anything else because that is a one-stop all solution and I think the best music site out there. But now let's talk about what I actually use the Canon C70 for. Since the Canon C70 is such a great all-rounder, you can basically use it for almost everything. I've been using it as a main camera, run and gun, handheld, for a big rep series that we just wrapped up, and there's a full behind the scenes on this channel if you want to check it out. But I also use it for B-roll shooting on a commercial, as a B-cam to my Canon C300 on various commercial jobs shooting interviews. So overall there's not that much that this camera can do, but it also does have some downfalls where I won't be using it as my A-cam, but I will be talking about any of that in this video. But overall, I just want to give you my opinion and my experience with this camera, and I won't really go into all the minor details and all the specs and resolutions that the camera has, because a lot of you know that already. So I'll be trying to focus in this review on my experience using this camera on actual commercial jobs. As always on this channel, let's start with the body and the design. The Canon C70 has a weird shape. It's a mixture between a big 1DX Mark III and a Canon C300, Canon C200, and I do kinda like it. I still prefer an actual cinema camera in the traditional way or in a box form because it makes rigging the camera a little harder and there's always things protruding out, but I did find a good balance in my Canon C70 rig video, but you've probably already seen that one. But overall, I really do like shooting with it. It feels great in my hand, especially with the side strap, and you can also easily throw it on a gimbal, and it has plenty of customizable buttons, so it's really easy and quick to use in almost any kind of scenarios. One thing I really don't like about the body is the missing SDI port. It only has a full HDMI port, which is fine for a lot of things, but overall I would much prefer having an SDI out. I just came back from shooting for Red Bull, and after I was done shooting, every time they needed an SDI port so that they could just get the signal and just go live with it right afterwards. And they required an SDI port, so I couldn't even have shown up with the Canon C70. I've also done some live streaming in the past where we required 50 meters of SDI cables to go live with the camera, so again the HDMI wouldn't have cut it. But that is something really specific and wouldn't be interesting for the most of you. But overall, SDI is still a way more secure connection, and I have tried a couple of HDMI ports and numerous kind of HDMI cables in the past. Actually, I just had a big job for a spa here in Austria with 7 days of production, and I used the Canon C70 on a gimbal on that day, and one of my HDMI cables broke. And this isn't the first HDMI cable that gave out on me on a job. So that was kind of unfortunate, and that probably would not have happened if I would have been able to shoot with an SDI cable. As a matter of fact, the HDMI port on my Canon C300 Mark III is currently fried for no reason whatsoever, and Bell just got her R5 back because her HDMI port was also broken. So HDMI really isn't a great tool if you use it constantly because it's just prone to failure. It oftentimes gives out on you after a while, and SDI is just so much better. Another thing I don't like about the body is the battery solution, because there's no real good way to attach a V-mount battery to it, and I am a big fan of V-mount batteries because I like the form factor as well as the power that it gives you, because you can power your camera, you can power an external monitor, and even additional accessories like timecode generators or HDMI transmitters. That really isn't that big of a deal because there are batteries that I will link down in the description below that are 100 watts and that have D-tap as well as USB outs but again, the form factor isn't 100% right, but that is just a minor detail. Another thing that I would have liked for the Canon C70 to have is anything other than just SD cards, because a lot of people think that SD cards are cheaper than CF Express cards, when in fact, if you're looking at V90 cards, the SD cards are actually a little bit more expensive, if not way more expensive than their CF Express counterparts when it comes to price per gigabyte. And overall, I also had a couple of failures with these SD cards that I couldn't initialize them inside of the camera. Sometimes I had some buffering issues, the cards was a little bit too slow, or I had some corrupted files. I could always get the internal tool to fix my files after they've been corrupted, but that happened quite often to me, and according to a lot of people online, that is a common thing with the SD cards on a Canon C70. I also want to mention the LCD screen here. I don't really use it often, if at all, because I'm shooting manually focused most of the time, so I'm shooting on a gimbal, so I'm using a big 7-inch screen. I'm also shooting outdoors a lot, so the internal screen definitely is not bright enough to judge your exposure or your focus. So I would highly recommend using an external monitor, but it's always nice to have that one. So if you really want to have a small running gun setup and you just want to have the internal screen, it's there, it's already built into the camera, so I do appreciate having it. And it's also really nice that you can use your external monitor alongside your touchscreen, so when skimming through footage, when playing back some footage, or if you want to do some touch to focus or just quickly change some settings in the touchscreen menu, it's always there. And this is one thing that I really think is kind of cool, and I wish that all Canon cameras had a small built-in touchscreen that you can always use and stow away, but that is definitely a plus for the Canon C70. Another minor thing I really don't like about the Canon C70 is the placement of the SD cards up front, because when putting it on a gimbal, I cannot open the port and I have to just unscrew the camera, move it around from my RS2 just to get access to the SD card slot. So I feel like there should have been a better way to place these SD cards so that I can access them even when shooting on a gimbal. So those are all the issues that I have with the Canon C70 body. For some people that might be minor issues. For me, a lot of times these are actually deal breakers, and I'm going with my Canon C300 Mark III instead because of those. But again, this is probably a little bit subjective, but overall I still do like the body of the Canon C70. Another thing I want to touch on separately is the RF mount, because when the Canon C70 was released, I was really jealous of the RF mount because my Canon C300 Mark III doesn't have one. But then when using the Canon C70, it really didn't make that big of a difference, because in the beginning I really wanted to use my Canon 28-70 2.0 with the Canon C70. But then again, a 28-70 on a Super 35 sensor really is not a focal length that I would use at all, because it's just way too narrow and way too long. So I'm mostly using something in the wide angle region, and on my Canon C300 I'm using a focal range from 11 to 35 millimeters. And there isn't really anything in the RF market out there, so I would probably still use the Sigma 18-35 1.8 for the C70, as well as the Tokina 11-20, and those are the two lenses that I use the most when shooting on Super 35. Both of which are EF and not RF, so I wouldn't really stand a benefit if my C300 or, well, the C70 had an RF mount. The RF mount is definitely more future-proof, and that way I would like to have one on my Canon C300 Mark III as well, because we're really in a weird spot right now when it comes to purchasing lenses, because you don't really want to invest a lot of money into EF glass because it's obviously the past, but there aren't really enough RF lenses out there right now to justify getting into the RF system. Another really big selling point of the RF mount though is its ability to use the Canon speed booster, and that eventually was the reason why I got the Canon C70 for my business. I've never been a fan of speed boosters whatsoever because, well, adding a glass between your lens and your sensor will definitely most of the times decrease image quality. It will also most likely decrease your ability of using autofocus. So with all the other cameras that I had, I was never a fan of using a speed booster. Now that the speed booster is by Canon itself, that changes drastically, because at least I couldn't tell a huge difference in autofocus capabilities when using the speed booster or not, and also I couldn't really tell a lot of decrease in image quality, but I will talk about the image quality part a little later. Having a full frame field of view on the Canon C70 is a big deal to me because I was always struggling when shooting on a gimbal with my Canon C300 Mark III which lens to use, because I do want to go wide from time to time when doing establishing shots or just having to follow somebody around. But I need a wide angle lens with a good autofocus, and for the Super 35 sensor there really isn't any. So now that I have the speed booster on the Canon C70, I can use my regular EF glass, like the 16-35 for example, and that combination is amazing for using the Canon C70 on a gimbal because I can go really wide, it's also quiet, and it has amazing autofocus. Now let's talk about the autofocus a little bit, because Canon is known for their amazing dual pixel autofocus, and when the Canon C70 was announced, I was even told that it is better than the one on the Canon C300 Mark III, which I can't really confirm. And overall, I really didn't like the camera that much, and that's also one reason why I didn't get it in the first place, because the autofocus just isn't reliable enough. Neither on my Canon C300 Mark III nor on the Canon C70. I just shot a really big run and gun project with the Canon C70 as my main camera, and I've been using the Canon 16-35 because I wanted to utilize the autofocus a bit. And on first day of shooting, it just messed up a lot of the times. It was really unreliable, and I don't even know why. I had my subject standing right in front of me, not moving a lot, and I was on face detection only. And again, it just started hunting once in a while, or it just didn't find the face at all. So I quickly switched back to manual focus and shot the rest of the series in manual focus. What is amazing about the autofocus though, that after the latest firmware update, you not only have this small box as well as the even tinier box, but now you have the wide field, so that you have the entire field of the entire sensor as an autofocus. And that is so much more convenient when shooting on a gimbal, and I've been using the Canon C70 on gimbal shoots a lot with the speed booster, and although you only have 60% of your sensor when it comes to autofocus points when using the speed booster, it also always did a really reliable job, so I can definitely recommend it, using it as a gimbal cam. It's not perfect, it does mess up a lot, but it's still a really great camera and it is reliable enough to use with autofocus on a gimbal, and that's what I've done over the past couple of months with the Canon C70, and it's been reliable enough. Next up on our list is a very important point, and that is image quality. But before we talk about image quality, let's talk about today's sponsor, Epidemic Sound. And if you've been following the channel for a while now, you might have noticed that we didn't have too many sponsors on here, and that is not due to lack of sponsorship opportunities, but I only want to be sponsored by a company that I really do love and use myself. And ever since we discovered Epidemic Sound in 2017, we've been using this for this YouTube channel and most of our client work as well. A lot of the other music subscription sites have rather generic music options, and a lot of them are totally fine for ambience music or background music, but if you're looking for something that leads your video, you need something with vocals a lot of the times, and well, most of the choices out there really aren't good. Not so with Epidemic Sound. There is a surprising amount of really cool artists that I would literally listen to when not using it for video editing, because there's some cool vocals, there's some hip-hop tracks, and I really can recommend them, and I've used them a lot for our model videos, and I will also continue to do so in the future. Here at Monkey Pixels, we do have a lot of fast turnaround projects, not only for our own YouTube channel, but also for a lot of our clients. And I want a one-stop all solution for this. I don't want to go to one side for all my sound effects and then go to another side for vocals and another side for other kind of music. So with Epidemic Sound, I have everything, because they have a huge library of sound effects that we've been using frequently for all of our client work as well as our own YouTube channel.
If I'm really going all day, save me from myself.
And if you want to sign up to Epidemic Sound, there's a link down in my description below, and you get an entire month for free if you sign up. So go ahead and check out that link down in the description below. And now let's talk about the image quality. And I will be referring mostly to using the Canon C70 with the speed booster, because this is how I use the Canon C70 about 98% of the times. When it comes to image quality, let's divide this into 5 different categories. One is dynamic range, one is sharpness, one is color, then there's slow motion, and then there's low light capabilities. The dynamic range of the Canon C70 is absolutely amazing, but that was expected since it's using the same DGO sensor that the Canon C300 Mark III uses. And I really do like the image coming out of the Canon C70, and it just looks filmic and you have a lot of nice highlights, but also you never really crush the shadows. And when comparing it to other cameras, it does become apparent that the Canon C70 has a huge latitude, especially when using C-Log 2 with Cinema Gamut. Out of every camera that I have used on a regular basis, alongside the Canon C300 Mark III and the Canon C500 Mark II, it does feature the best dynamic range, and I wouldn't want to trade it for any other camera with less dynamic range from now on, because I just fell in love with it so much. The next category is sharpness, and this is probably the biggest issue that I have with the Canon C70 and its image quality. Because the Canon C70 is noticeably softer than basically any other camera that I have used in the past. It's softer than the Canon C300 Mark III, the Canon C500 Mark II, it's way softer than my EOS R5, but it's also softer than the Sony FX6 or the Sony FX3 or the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. So overall, it really isn't a sharp image. It is organic. A lot of the times I put mist filters in front of my lens anyway to get a little bit of a softer image, but it's always easier to get a softer image and soften it up than to have a already soft image and need to sharpen it up. So that is something that I'm really not too happy about with the Canon C70, because comparing it to other cameras, it is really soft sometimes. And this definitely isn't only due to the speed booster, because I also used the Canon C70 without the speed booster, and you could also immediately tell that it isn't as sharp as other cameras, especially when shooting in wide angle. That isn't to say that you can't use the image coming out of the C70 and it still looks amazing, but if you're into really high resolution sharpness, then the Canon C70 is probably not for you. It gives off that filmic look that is a little bit softer in and of itself, and that I really do like for most of the stuff that I'm shooting, but sometimes I really do like a little bit more sharpness. The last category we have when it comes to image quality is colors. And yes, people talk a lot about Canon colors, and I am one of those people, because I just love the Canon colors more than any of the other cameras. And yes, Sony has come a long way with their skin tones and their overall colors, and this is obviously subjective, but I'm definitely hashtag Team Canon when it comes to colors out of the Canon C70. And the Canon C70's color profile is definitely the best that I have ever used alongside my Canon C300 Mark III or the Canon C500 Mark II. The Canon colors are a little bit on the warmer side, which is something that I definitely prefer. I also have a really easy time of getting the skin tones right, and most of the times I don't have to do anything, but I will talk about this in the next category when it comes to color grading. And overall, even when using this job for live streaming or for the Red Bull job, which was basically live, then you can just bake in the Canon LUT and the results are already amazing. And you don't have to have a lifeless image with other cameras that I've used before, where you need to have custom LUTs enabled in camera to just give a live feed out of the camera. So if you do want to do some quick and dirty work, the Canon C70 is your workhorse. I just teased about it, so now let's talk about my color grading workflow, and this is something that is really important for me when using a camera, and well, spoiler alert, the Canon C70 is absolutely amazing when it comes to that. 99% of the times I'm shooting in C-Log 2 with Cinema Gamut, and I just throw the original Canon C-Log 2 to Cinema Gamut LUT on top of my footage, and I convert it to Rec 709. And that already looks pretty decent right off the gate. So now all I need to do in most cases is take one of our custom LUTs from our Canon LUT pack, which you can also find down in the description below, and apply it to my footage. And then at around 30 to 50%, I already have amazing results, and it's really great to just get a quick color grade. And with other cameras before, I always needed to add a little bit more contrast, take contrast away, or which is the worst case scenario, you need to adjust the skin tones a lot. And with Canon, I personally just like the colors straight out of camera, when converting it to Rec 709, just adding one of our LUTs. And this is really crucial when you have a lot of fast turnaround projects and when shooting for this YouTube channel, because we don't have the time to color grade and match all kind of different shots. And with this workflow, it's so much easier to get a lot of these videos out quickly. Obviously, a lot of this is subjective, but for me, when applying the original Canon LUT to convert it to Rec. 709, this is a great quick base that I just do with one click whenever I import the footage into Final Cut or any other NLE. And then from there, it's so easy to get the results that I like. And with other cameras, I was always struggling because everything took a lot longer, especially when you don't have a really good conversion LUT, and then sometimes you even need to grade everything manually, and that just takes so much more time. And then a lot of the time it was also struggling in different kind of scenarios, and with the Canon C70 I never really had that issue. So now let's briefly touch on slow motion. There's two options. You can either shoot in 50 or 60 frames, you can also go to 100 and 120 frames. But you also have the option to go all the way up to 180 frames if you use a Super 16mm crop from your main sensor. And honestly, I haven't done that on the Canon C70 yet, but I've done this on the Canon C200 Mark III, and overall I deemed it not worth it in 99% of the times, because 120 frames is plenty enough, and the decrease in overall image quality when punching into your image and getting the 180 frames usually is a trade-off that I'm not willing to make. When it comes to 100 or 120 frames though, it's absolutely amazing, and I really do like the results that I'm getting out of this camera. And I can use the entire sensor, I don't have to crop in, and it's easy to get to. We don't have audio recording, which sometimes would be something that I would like, but since I'm recording externally most of the times anyway, this probably isn't too big of an issue either. Overall, the slow motion of the Canon C70 looks absolutely amazing, and this is probably the best slow motion that I have used on any other camera, alongside my Canon C300 Mark III of course. I do wish it had higher frame rate options like 180 frames and 240 frames without losing image quality, but in reality I don't even use the 100 or 120 frames that often, so that is plenty for me, and I'm pretty happy with the results. Last category is low light capability, so let's briefly touch on that. And yes, it does feature a DGO sensor, which means that you do have a lot better low light capabilities. Overall, compared to some other Sony cameras, it's definitely lagging behind, but what I really do like about the Canon C70's image is that it stays consistent in colors even when you go higher in ISO values. So I don't really shoot that often in low light situations, but when I do, I don't have any issues of just cranking up the ISO, because I know that I can keep my colors intact, and if I do introduce too much noise into my footage, I just use Neat Video to get rid of all that noise, and that way I can get amazing footage even when shooting at night. Bear in mind, this is not a dedicated low light camera, but overall I still think that the Canon C70 really holds its ground very well, and I never really had any issues if I had to crank up the ISO. But again, I'm not a low light shooter anymore, and most of the times I'm shooting either in well lit situations that I control myself, or I'm shooting outdoors. So I don't really have too big of a verdict on this, but since I've been using the Canon C300 Mark III a lot, and this one was actually performing quite well in low light situations, I assume that the Canon C70 would pretty much be the same. Another topic I think is worth mentioning is the recording formats. One thing I always hated when cameras had different kind of codecs for different kind of frame rates. And to an extent this is true for the Canon C70 as well. If you want to shoot at the XFAVC All-I mode, then you can only do so in 25 frames or 24 frames. And I've been switching around 25 frames and 50 frames a lot. And this isn't really easy, and if I wanted to do this in an All-I codec, I couldn't do so. So I would have to shoot everything in 25 frames in the All-I codec, and then when going to 50 frames or higher, I need to switch to either the MP4 HEVC codec, or I need to go to a long GOP codec. That is absolutely horrible to edit, so that was kind of bumming me out in the beginning. Then I did some testing though, and I tried all of the different codecs on all of our different computers. And to my surprise, the H.265 codecs work absolutely fine on my Intel iMac as well as all of our M1 MacBooks. This really surprised me because the Canon EOS R5 has basically the same codecs. It's a 10-bit 422 H.265 codec, and the Intel iMac really struggles with the footage coming out of my EOS R5. Not so with the Canon C70, and honestly, I don't really know why, probably because the bitrate is a lot lower, but overall the image looks absolutely stunning, and it's really manageable file sizes as well. So now, when I'm shooting with the Canon C70, I'm only using the MP4 HEVC 10-bit 422 codec, and again, it works fine on all of our computers, it's manageable file sizes, and technically I don't even need a V90 SD card for it, and a V60 card will do. So here, where I thought this would maybe be a minus in the beginning, this actually turned out to be a plus. And since we're shooting so much content and my 72 terabyte RAID system is already filling up alongside my other 24 terabyte SSD RAID system, I really need to shoot in lower codecs, and I can't afford to shoot in the highest codec at all times. So the Canon C70 offers exactly that codec that is the perfect compromise between great image quality and great file size, and I wish that all my other cameras had the same codec. Before I wrap this video up and give you my final verdict of the Canon C70, especially in a professional environment, let's talk about the overall usability and how I like using that camera, especially in a professional environment. There are some quirks to this camera, like on every camera. For example, you can't really display a LUT throughout the HDMI port for some reason. After the latest firmware, you can activate a view assist, which isn't really recommended because when comparing it to the original LUT, it definitely blows out your image, so you are probably going to underexpose a lot of your shots if you just judge it by the image. But you can obviously have a workaround and just use the original Canon Rec 709 LUT and put it onto an external monitor, and this is what I do. So this actually isn't really a big issue. But overall, I really did like using the Canon C70 because it feels very familiar and intuitive, but it's also pretty similar to my Canon C300 Mark III, when not almost identical, so that I'm always familiar with because I've been shooting on Canon cameras for a long time. I also like that you have a lot of customizable buttons and that you also have the touchscreen if you want to quickly change some features on the camera. So here it is, my final verdict of the Canon C70. Would I recommend it? 100% yes. If I only had to choose one camera to shoot on for the rest of my life, would it be the Canon C70? No, it would not. I would still prefer my Canon C300 Mark III or a Canon C500 Mark II, but that doesn't mean that the Canon C70 can't be an amazing A camera or an even better B camera to my Canon C300 Mark III. Me personally, I really do love this camera, but I do still miss the RAW codec, the SDI outs, and better media recording options like CF Express cards and some other minor quirks. But other than that, I will be using the Canon C70 on a lot of commercial works. I also will be using it as my A-cam for a lot of my shoots, and I'm really happy with my purchase. And overall, I still think that the speed booster is the absolute game changer here. So I think that this video will turn out to be quite long, so if you made it this far, please give it a thumbs up to help the channel grow. Subscribe for more because there will be more content about the Canon C70. Also check out Epidemic Sound down in the description below, and I hope to see you on the next one. It is 1 AM in the morning and I just wrapped up filming another YouTube video that took me no less than 1 hour and 23 minutes to record, because this has been a complicated one. But I'm glad I'm finally finished, and this video will go up in a couple of weeks or maybe a little earlier than that. But now I'm done for today and I can't wait to travel to Mexico and take some vacation.